It's been great to catch up here at Business New Zealand with a number of businesses and also to outline our vision that, as challenging as times have been, we're turning the corner, and importantly we've got a budget that's going to be very focused on economic growth, but we'll also be incredibly responsible about how we manage our economy as well, which is what we need in these uncertain times. So, but also New Zealand has a fantastic future, immense amount of potential, and that's what our Going for Growth plan is all about. Economic growth will put more money in Kiwis' back pockets. With that, happy to take your questions.
You've announced that you're going to continue the research development tax incentive. For how long?
Well, we haven't made a decision not to. It'll be continuing for as long as it does, and there's no cut-off date. We just want to roll forward with that policy. We think there's things that we'll continue to look always about in the coming years, also about what else we can do to support businesses, to get them to support their growth. But no, we want to make sure that that's understood across the business community, that that policy is remaining, gives everyone certainty. As you know, we had an obligation to do a review of the scheme under law, but it's good to know that we're very comfortable with that staying in place. Great. Well, thank you very much for your questions. It's been lovely.
On pay equity, are you worried about female voters deserting nationally?
Look, what we're doing here is this is a government very committed to pay equity. We are committed to eliminating sex-based discrimination, but we are making some common sense amendments to make sure that actually it's focused on what it should be focused on, which is eliminating sex-based discrimination, not bringing in other labour conditions into those conversations. And so, I think what we're doing here is pretty sensible. Our primary focus has been, in the changes that we're making, is to make sure that it's more robust, it's more sustainable, it's much more workable.
National has previously had, problems with female voters. Are you expecting this policy will be something that will win them over?
Well, when would you say we have?
Historically.
When?
Under earlier in, while you're in opposition.
I'd just say to you, I think New Zealand men and women actually appreciate having a government that's focused on the things that matter most to them. And of course, whether I talk to women or men, what everyone's focused on is the cost of living. And what they're looking for is strong economic management in uncertain times, and that's what they're getting.
Why did you put it through under urgency? What's the urgent nature of this? If it's not an economic consideration for the budget, what is the rationale?
The rationale is that it's unworkable to create the
urgency through Parliament?
Sure, I was about to answer. It's important because we don't want to have two competing systems. You want to give people massive amounts of certainty and to make sure that we've got one system to operate in the pay equity space. This doesn't preclude any individual, any union making a new application under the pay equity laws that we've just passed.
Why didn't you put punching down on women with these changes? What's your response to that?
Well, I totally disagree. What we're trying to do is, this is a government very committed to pay equity. It's a government very committed to eliminating sex-based discrimination. But it's also about making sure we're making some common sense adjustments, essentially to get it back to what was proposed under the last national government in 2017. And so, what you're seeing here is actually to make it, it honestly is to make it much more workable and sustainable going forward, and to give everyone maximum amounts of clarity. And so, that's what this is about. It's about making sure that we've got a system and pay equity that gives everybody massive amounts of clarity and is much more workable.
Do you think the opposition is scared?
Yeah, look, I do, but I think the reality for us is that we are focused on pay equity. There is no doubt this government is committed to that. We are committed to eliminating sex-based discrimination, but also what we're doing is making sure a system is much more workable, and it is focused on the intention of what it was designed to do, which was to eliminate sex-based discrimination. And you've seen some very broad claims come through. You've seen some very different comparators. Think about school librarians being compared to fisheries officers, and all we're doing is some common sense adjustments to make sure that the system stays very focused, is very workable and sustainable going forward.
The savings from them, like Bernard Hickey's done his calculations, says it's $17 billion worth of savings over 4 years, as opposed to the $14 billion for tax cuts tax relief over the next 4 years. Is the economic consideration not just purely driving this in terms of it coming through before the budget?
Well, as I said, our primary focus has been to make sure we get a much more workable system. What the government has done is put money aside for pay equity obligations that will come under the new legislation. I admit that the costs will be likely lower for government going forward, but as I said, individuals, unions can certainly make applications under that. As to quantums, we'll talk about that when we get to the budget.
We've also spoken to some under 16-year-olds about social media and changes.
Yes.
They have said instead of worrying about banning social media, you should worry about paying women fairly. What's your response to that?
Well, we are. We are deeply committed to equal pay. We're deeply committed to pay parity. And we are also committed to pay equity. Those are the different concepts around making sure that women get paid equally as men. But in pay equity space, all we're doing is making sure that we've made some common sense adjustments to make sure that that system is more workable going forward, and that's important that we do that. But what I'd say to you is we are a government very much focused on what New Zealanders want, and you talk to women, men, young people, older people, what they're all wrestling with right now is the cost of living, and that requires a government very much focused on economic growth. That's obviously what our budget will deliver.
The national unemployment rate.
What's your response to students who say they'll find a way around social media bans?
Well, look, all we're doing here is just making sure, having spoken to many parents, many teachers, many principals, who say, look, social media it's got some really positive things, but it's also got some really negative things, and they see it impacting our children's well-being, particularly with respect to being exposed to inappropriate content, particularly when you think about social media addiction, and as a result, wanting to make sure that we put some safe lines and some guidelines around that. I want to make sure, in the same way we have protections in the physical world in New Zealand, we also need to have protections in the virtual world.
The national unemployment rate is 5.1, but it's 6.4 in Auckland and going up. What's it failing in Auckland?
Well, again, we've got an economic recovery underway. It's a little bit too speed at the moment. We're seeing it being launched out of the agricultural sector through the tourism sector, and particularly in the South Island, as I noted in my speech, Otago, Southland, Canterbury. And we are working hard to make sure that we do get growth back into Auckland and all our metropolitan centres as well. And it is coming, and as I said, the trend will be our friend as we work our way through that. But again, what do we have to do? We have to make sure that we run the economy well and deal with the fundamentals of government spending and inflation and interest rates and growth. But also we have this huge opportunity, as I've tried to outline through the Going for Growth plan, not just to watch the recovery take place, but actually to shape it so that we can really step change our productivity as a country and get those higher paying jobs that we want to see happen here. So it's a government that's very, very focused on economic growth in order to get it across all of the country.
How does it impact the country when Auckland's struggling though?
Well, as I said, let's be clear, there are real sectors that are still struggling. There are others that are coming through the recovery well, certainly agriculture, tourism, as I've mentioned. But we're going to continue to focus on economic growth, and that's what our budget's going to be focused on.
You've got about $500 billion in capital spend in the budget. What are you going to do with that?
Well, as I said, we want to make sure that we invest that in some frontline services, health, education, transport. As you know, we've got a big program around building out world-class infrastructure so that actually that can help New Zealanders economically, socially, environmentally. And that's important that we continue to invest in capital that's productivity enhancing. And that's really what we're doing.
Why is now the right time to cut, reducing the operating allowance? I accept that you're increase in capital allowance, but why is now the right time to cut some elements of the budget?
Well, what we're doing is just operating within a smaller operating allowance. We're not cutting an allowance. It's not a negative allowance. It's actually a $1.6 billion or $1.3 billion allowance. And what we're doing there is making sure that actually, as I said in my speech, when we actually have good fiscal management that actually puts us on a pathway to pay down our debt, to make sure that we get economic growth, we keep inflation low, interest rates low, that's very, very important. And that's contributing to lower interest rates, as you saw when I referenced in the speech, the ANZ report saying that smaller operating allowance creates 5 to 10 basis points of lower interest rates. The Treasury's assessment of the package, or the budgetary package, creating 30 basis points lower of interest rates. All of that adds up a lot. How does it add up? Well, at the moment, you've seen it. We've gone from 5.5 to 3.5% of interest. If you think about someone with a 25-year mortgage, $500,000, that's $300 a fortnight that's back in their pocket that they get to spend in the economy as we go forward. So, for us, it's about fiscal discipline really matters because, as we've seen, the pain and suffering has come from losing that fiscal discipline. You have to have your budget initiatives anchored in a fiscal strategy.
And this is all happening at a time in that global context where things could go badly quite fast, right? So, the government may need to step in and do additional measures.
Well, but that's frankly why you need political leaders that are economically literate and can actually navigate New Zealand through challenging times. And that's what we're saying here is we are clear-eyed about the challenges that we see out there in the world, but you've seen a government from day one be very, very focused on actually growing our economy, rebuilding the economy, lowering the cost of living. That's what we're fixated on. And now's not the time to put any of that at risk.
Are you in danger of perhaps getting the worst of both worlds out of this strategy, in the sense that there's still several years till you hit a surplus, but equally, economy's potentially going to go through tough times, and maybe, arguably, more spending might be needed than you will allocate
Well,
to these areas.
Well, I want people who advocate that to be very clear about that, because, as I said in my speech, under successive finance ministers, you saw New Zealand able to respond incredibly well through the GFC, post the Christchurch earthquake, and through the COVID experience, by virtue of having lower levels of public debt. And that's why I say good fiscal management is important, because I want to make sure that we pass off a good set of books to future administrations should we have any other crisis that comes upon us. But what you're seeing in this budget is responsible economic management, focus on growth, and yes, while we acknowledge it's challenging times and it's difficult economic conditions globally, we've got a great plan to be able to navigate New Zealand through that.
Cool. Last question about successive finance
Sorry.
ministers. Was that a compliment to Grant Robertson?
No, I wouldn't count that experience as a successful period in New Zealand's life. I just put it to you, that economic vandalism caused huge pain on low and middle income working New Zealanders, and I find that I find that utterly unacceptable. That there was such a cavalier economic vandalism and illiteracy, frankly, under that administration that has caused the pain and suffering for low and middle income working New Zealanders. If you care about low and middle income working New Zealanders, you run the economy well, you have a responsible set of fiscal strategies in order to navigate the economy through it.
When you said New Zealand as well, so during the COVID period by some finance ministers, sorry, that's what I was...
Yeah, Bill English did a great job of leaving the incoming administration with a low level of public debt, as you saw, around $60 billion, now sitting at 3 times higher at $180 billion, with an interest bill that was $3.5 billion a year, now almost $9 billion and rising. And that's a great example of a good finance minister who stewarded New Zealand's finances